Welcome, dear viewers, to a tale of unexpected talents, shocking revelations, and a twist of fate so dramatic. You'll question everything you know about destiny. In a lavish mansion dripping with opulence, a humble waitress finds herself thrust into the spotlight by a cunning millionaire determined to crush her spirit. Little does he suspect her extraordinary gift, a talent that will leave his haughty guests speechless. In a whirlwind of glittering gold and quiet perseverance, we witness betrayal, humiliation, and, ultimately, sweet revenge. Brace yourselves for a story where the underdog triumphs and the mighty learn to bow before true brilliance. The day began like any other for Emily Carter, a young waitress who worked at the upscale restaurant housed on the ground floor of the historic Waldorf Astoria in Manhattan. Emily was slender and soft-spoken, with honey-brown hair often secured in a simple bun, and a grace about her movements that suggested a hidden elegance no one truly noticed. At the height of a busy lunchtime rush, she wove through crowded tables, balancing silver trays of exotic delicacies and crystal goblets of sparkling water. Each day was a new spectacle of the city's wealth and extravagance, but Emily had grown accustomed to it. Or so she thought. What most patrons and even her co-workers did not know was that Emily had once dreamed of becoming a concert pianist. Raised in a modest household in Philadelphia, she'd shown an early aptitude for the piano, mesmerizing neighbors with her renditions of Chopin and Debussy at age 9. Her father, a freelance music teacher, had recognized her gift immediately and nurtured it. However, finances were never sufficient in their home, and when her father passed away unexpectedly, any dreams of attending a prestigious music academy dissolved. Emily found herself in New York City shortly after high school, trying to make ends meet. She promised herself that one day she would return to her music. But life, as it often does, had other plans, pulling her deeper into the daily grind of rent, bills, and responsibility. No one at the Waldorf Astoria's restaurant suspected Emily's hidden talent, least of all the flamboyant millionaire, Bradford Kensington, who lunched there with an entourage of clients, personal assistants, and sycophants almost every week. He was an imposing figure in his late 40s, with slicked-back silver hair and a tailored suit that always hinted at wealth untold. Bradford was known for his arrogance, his sharp tongue, and the bottomless pit that was his ego. The staff quietly dreaded serving him. Each visit demanded perfect service and unwavering smiles, lest they draw his patronizing criticisms. On the fateful day that would alter Emily's life, Bradford strolled in, flanked by 2 business partners. He settled into his usual corner booth, a space the restaurant often reserved for him out of courtesy. As Emily approached to take his order, the glimmer in his eyes spoke of impatience. He tapped a sleek fountain pen against the table, eyeing her uniform. "Ah, Emily, right?" he drawled without looking up. "I assume you already know what I want?" She bowed her head politely, reciting his preferences by memory. A medium-rare filet mignon, no seasoning, steamed vegetables on the side, and a glass of your usual Malbec, Mr. Kensington. Right away, Bradford only nodded, a faint smirk on his lips, as he turned back to his associates, launching into a conversation about some multi-million-dollar development in the Hamptons. Emily retreated, relieved the interaction was short. She moved swiftly between kitchen and dining room, delivering bread baskets, refilling drinks, and occasionally checking on Bradford's table. He barely acknowledged her, too engrossed in boasting about a potential real estate deal that would apparently dwarf any competition. But fate has a strange way of revealing the hidden layers of people's souls. A few tables down, an older couple celebrating their anniversary asked Emily if there was a piano in the restaurant for a small romantic request. The man had once wooed his wife with a Frank Sinatra tune when they were young. The restaurant did indeed have a grand piano, an exquisite Steinway and Sons, but it was more of a decorative piece, stationed near the bar and rarely played unless a special event required it. Hearing the request, Bradford let out a derisive chuckle. "This is hardly a lounge with live entertainment," he remarked loudly. "Perhaps the staff thinks they can entertain us with some off-key ballads." Emily glanced at the older couple, a sweet sadness in their eyes. Something inside her stirred. They looked so earnest, so hopeful that their special day might come with a touch of magic. For a moment, Emily hesitated. She wasn't sure if she should volunteer or remain silent. She had not played in public since she was a teenager. One of her co-workers, Daria, overheard the couple's request and gently nudged Emily, knowing she could play. But Emily shook her head. She was a bundle of nerves and simply not ready. The restaurant's manager also politely declined the couple's request, explaining the piano was mostly decorative these days, and they had no scheduled pianist on staff. Sighing in resignation, the anniversary couple accepted it, though disappointment weighed in the air. Emily returned to her station, her hands trembling with a mixture of regret and longing. She could have played something simple for them, just one piece, but her fear of attention and possible mistakes overcame her desire to rekindle her passion. Bradford noticed the tension, the unspoken disappointment, and he thrived on such moments. He was the kind of man who enjoyed seeing vulnerability in others. Intrigued, he called Emily over again, under the pretense of wanting more wine. "You see those folks over there?" he said, nodding toward the anniversary couple. They wanted piano music. "Do you think you could do it?" Before she could answer, his lips curled in a taunting smile. "You do look the part of someone who might have taken a few lessons. Or is that too much to assume? Perhaps your skills aren't as refined as your table-serving abilities." Emily felt a hot flush creep up her neck. She forced a polite smile. "I'm just a waitress, sir," she replied. "Music isn't in my job description." Bradford leaned back, folding his arms. "Shame," he said, then looked at his associates, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "I guess good help is hard to find these days. Even mild entertainment is too much to ask." Had it not been for the other waiters stepping in, Bradford might have continued with his passive-aggressive jabs all afternoon. Emily resisted the urge to defend herself. As the day went on, she tried to shake off Bradford's snarky attitude. She'd dealt with difficult customers before, but there was something particularly cutting about his words. By the time she finished her shift, Emily felt drained. She walked home along the bustling Manhattan streets, head bowed against the wind that whipped around skyscraper corners. The city lights glowed overhead, but she noticed none of their warmth. Her mind was on her father's old, upright piano, the memory of his gentle coaching voice, and the nights she spent practicing until her fingers ached. Could she have stepped forward to play for that older couple? Should she have? Little did she know, this was just the beginning of a chain of events that would catapult her back into the world of music in the most dramatic, unexpected way. Several days passed, and Emily found herself in a routine once again. Bradford came in for lunch as usual, but no major incidents occurred. The staff kept everything running smoothly, ensuring the demanding millionaire had no cause for complaint. For a moment, Emily allowed herself to believe life had returned to normal. Then, one afternoon, a handwritten invitation arrived at the restaurant addressed to her. The crisp envelope bore Bradford Kensington's personal emblem, an ornate letter K in gold foil. Confused, she opened it under the watchful eyes of her co-workers. Inside, she found an invitation to a lavish party at Bradford's private estate in the Upper East Side. The party was described as a musical soirée intended to celebrate a newfound business venture. Scrawled across the bottom was a note. "Miss Carter, I heard rumors you can play. Prove it or prove me right. See you there." Emily's heart pounded. She felt certain this was some sort of setup to belittle her. Why else would Bradford invite a waitress to an exclusive socialite gathering? And yet she couldn't ignore the small voice inside that whispered this might be her chance, a chance to let the world hear her music once more. The staff around her buzzed with curiosity. Some teased her gently, suggesting she go and show him up. Others warned her to steer clear. Bradford Kensington's parties were infamous for their over-the-top extravagance and the harsh judgments of Manhattan's elite. A single misstep could lead to a humiliating scene. That evening, Emily paced her small apartment. The invitation sat on her kitchen table, taunting her. She set about making dinner, some leftover soup, and a salad, trying to distract herself. But the invitation seemed to glow with temptation from across the room. She recalled the night she first performed a concerto with her father as he accompanied her on a second piano. She was only 10, but the memory remained vivid. The bright stage lights, the smell of floor polish, the gentle hush that enveloped the audience. And then, the thunderous applause that followed every finished piece. She had felt so alive, so confident in her destiny to be a musician. Returning to reality, she realized her father's old upright piano back home had probably collected dust by now. Emily's mother had moved to a smaller place, with no room for such a large instrument. Besides, Emily had neither the financial means nor the mental bandwidth to maintain the daily discipline required for professional performance. But the ache to play never left her. It surfaced in quiet moments, at break time when she'd hum a tune under her breath, or in the swirl of classical music that came over the radio every so often. In her dreams, she was still that promising prodigy. Ultimately, curiosity and a fierce sense of pride won out. She decided to go to Bradford's party, if only to challenge the assumptions he, and likely many others, held about her. If he wanted to see her fail, she would at least fail on her own terms, with her head held high. And if the moment came when she could shine, she would not squander it. She spent the next few days preparing quietly after her shifts. Her friend Daria agreed to help by sneaking her into a small music practice room at a community center where Daria volunteered on weekends. Emily's fingers were stiff at first. She stumbled over scales she once played with ease. But the magic was still there, dormant but alive. By the end of the second night, she was playing short pieces flawlessly, though she was far from concert-ready. The flicker of hope in her heart burned brighter. On the evening of the party, Emily stood outside Bradford Kensington's luxurious townhouse, a palatial space with immaculate columns and wrought iron gates that shimmered under the streetlights. She wore a simple black evening gown she had purchased on sale, along with a pair of modest heels. She felt painfully out of place. A uniformed valet took her coat as she stepped inside the foyer. Lavish floral arrangements spilled from marble urns, filling the air with the scent of lilies and roses. Clusters of guests milled about, dressed in designer gowns and tailored suits, sipping from crystal flutes of champagne. Waitstaff circled the crowd with trays of hors d'oeuvre, people Emily recognized from her own line of work, giving her a subtle nod of camaraderie. She felt every self-conscious nerve fire at once as she made her way deeper into the mansion. She'd never been surrounded by so much wealth. The floors gleamed with Italian marble and priceless art lined the walls, each piece illuminated by specially angled lights. The deeper she ventured, the more the opulence closed in around her. Suddenly, a hush fell over the crowd near the main lounge, where a glossy black Steinway & Sons grand piano stood, its lid open to showcase the gilded harp within. Bradford himself appeared, wearing a bespoke tuxedo, his silver hair slicked back, as always. He raised a hand, commanding the attention of his guests. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced, his voice echoing in the grand hall, "welcome to a celebration of my latest venture in the world of luxury real estate. Tonight is about elegance, beauty, and of course, music." The crowd applauded politely, their curiosity piqued. Bradford gestured for someone to join him at the piano. Emily craned her neck, trying to see who he would call forth. A slender woman in a shimmering red dress stepped forward, some rising star from the local music conservatory, introduced by Bradford as Anastasia Blythe, an accomplished pianist. Anastasia took her seat at the piano, her posture regal, her fingers poised. The room fell silent as she began a complicated piece by Liszt, her technique flawless. The notes filled the mansion with an air of cultured sophistication. Emily listened, heart pounding. Anastasia's performance was nearly perfect, earning enthusiastic applause. Bradford beamed, turning to the crowd. "Now, that is what I call real music," he said with a dramatic flourish of his hands. "But the question is, can anyone here match that level of expertise?" His eyes scanned the guests until they locked onto Emily in the back. He smirked. "Miss Carter, please join us." A murmur of confusion rippled through the assembly. People shifted, trying to see who this Miss Carter was. Emily's throat tightened. For a moment, she regretted ever accepting the invitation. She forced herself to move forward, her gaze steady even as her legs threatened to buckle. Bradford introduced her in the most condescending tone possible. "This is Emily Carter, a server from the Waldorf Astoria's restaurant." She mentioned she had some musical background. "Let's see if she can entertain us tonight." Anastasia vacated the bench, flashing Emily a polite smile. Emily offered a nervous nod. She sat down, her hands hovering over the keys. A hush enveloped the crowd, tension palpable. She thought of her father, her younger self, the nights spent practicing with unwavering dedication. She had prepared a piece she felt confident in, a Chopin nocturne that was both evocative and technically demanding. She took a steadying breath, closed her eyes, and began. At first, her fingers trembled, causing a few notes to ring uncertainly. She heard a few hushed giggles, likely from Bradford's cronies, eager for a show of embarrassment. But then muscle memory took over. The melody poured out, each note gathering momentum. A hush descended over the space as her playing found its rhythm, the romantic swell of Chopin's harmonies resonating from wall to wall. She felt the music fill her being, her nerves dissolving into pure emotion. The nocturne's gentle ebb and flow allowed her to pour her heartache, her longing, her memories into the keys. With each measure, her confidence soared. Before she knew it, she'd reached the final chords. The last note floated in the stillness. She lifted her hands slowly, the silence that followed thick with awe. Then came the applause, tentative at first, but quickly swelling into a thunderous roar. A few people stood, clapping. Anastasia herself joined in, looking genuinely impressed. Emily felt tears prick her eyes. She rose from the bench, every nerve alive with adrenaline. Bradford's face was unreadable, a mix of grudging respect and frustration. Clearly, she had not crumpled under the pressure as he'd hoped. He forced a smile. "Surprisingly good," he said through thinly veiled contempt. The crowd, however, was not fooled. They were enthralled by Emily. After that moment, the party took an unexpected turn. People approached her with questions, compliments, and even business cards from individuals in the music industry. Emily felt overwhelmed, but also deeply gratified. She had walked into the lion's den, and against all odds, she emerged triumphant. Yet, the night was not without further drama. As the guests milled about, sipping champagne and discussing potential deals, Bradford sidled up to Emily, his expression cold. "I'll admit, you're not half bad," he conceded in a hushed voice, "but don't let it go to your head. You're still just a server who got lucky in front of some easily impressed guests." Emily stood her ground, smiling politely. "Thank you for the invitation, Mr. Kensington. I appreciate the chance to play again." Bradford merely gave a curt nod and drifted back into the crowd. But Emily felt the temperature in the room shift. She had caught a glimpse of something in Bradford's eyes, envy, maybe even fear. It was as though her performance had threatened his carefully curated social hierarchy. What Emily didn't know was that her moment of triumph had just ignited a deeper rivalry. Bradford despised being upstaged, especially in his own home, on a night meant to celebrate his successes. Before the evening was over, he was already formulating a plan, one that would make Emily's life far more complicated than she could ever imagine. Word of Emily's performance spread quickly through Manhattan's social circuit. At the Waldorf Astoria's restaurant, she became somewhat of a local legend among her co-workers. Some teased her about becoming the next big thing, while others expressed genuine admiration. The older couple, who had initially wanted to hear piano music, even returned one day, thanking her for her performance at Bradford's mansion after hearing about it from a mutual acquaintance. Emily blushed at the attention, still slightly unsure how to handle praise for a talent she had hidden away for so long. But not everyone was thrilled. In the weeks that followed, Emily noticed small inconveniences piling up. Her schedule changed unpredictably, her best shifts taken away. Managers suddenly criticized her performance over trivial things, like the angle of a dinner fork on the table, or the precise temperature of a served soup. At first, she chalked it up to normal managerial oversight. But then, strange rumors started circulating that she was ambitious, that she was trying to ingratiate herself with wealthy clients to leapfrog out of the waitress role. It didn't take long for Emily to suspect that Bradford was behind it all. Through subtle manipulations like well-placed comments to the restaurant's management, or perhaps leveraging his influence with the owners, he was making her work environment as uncomfortable as possible, probably hoping she'd quit. But Emily refused to be pushed out. She needed her job, and she was determined not to be bullied. Her growing circle of supporters, including Daria and a kind-hearted bartender named Jake, provided moral support. They encouraged her to continue playing piano whenever she could, even offering to cover her shifts if she got a small gig somewhere. But Emily feared that stepping into the limelight again would only provoke Bradford further. One afternoon, as she was finishing her shift, Emily found a note slipped into her locker. "Come to Le Poisson Bleu tomorrow at 7 p.m. Ask for the manager. Tell him you're here to audition." She had no idea who had sent the note. Le Poisson Bleu was a chic French restaurant known for its live jazz and classical music nights. It was owned by an influential restaurateur who also had ties to performing arts circles. Could this be a real opportunity or another of Bradford's traps? Jake volunteered to check it out discreetly. He came back later that night, confirming there was indeed an open slot for a pianist at the venue, and the manager was actively looking for new talent. Bolstered by this news, Emily decided to take a risk. If she could secure a side job playing piano, maybe she could transition away from waitressing altogether. It was a long shot, but the mere possibility reignited her long-dormant dream. The following evening, she arrived at Le Poisson Bleu wearing a simple black dress, her sheet music in tow. The manager, a friendly but meticulous man named Gerard Martin, invited her to play a short piece as an audition. She chose a delicate Debussy piece this time, Clair de Lune, one that always resonated with her emotional core. She started playing, letting each note float into the intimate space. Soft lights glowed against the aquamarine walls, and a small audience of staff and a few diners listened attentively. By the piece's conclusion, Gerard was leaning against the bar with misty eyes. He clapped softly, then waved her over. "That was truly lovely, Miss Carter," he said. "Would you consider playing here on weekends?" Emily felt her heart leap. She agreed, and within minutes they arranged a trial schedule, Friday and Saturday evenings. She would remain a waitress at the Waldorf Astoria during the day, and then she'd rush over to Le Poisson Bleu to play piano sets at night. It would be exhausting, but it was also the first real chance she had to showcase her skills in a professional setting. That night, she couldn't contain her excitement. She called Daria and Jake, thanking them for their support. She emailed her mother, explaining she might finally have a foot in the door to a better life. As she sank onto her old futon to sleep, a rare smile graced her lips. She felt she was on the precipice of something big, an actual future in music. But if life had taught her anything, it was that good fortune often comes entwined with new challenges. While Emily played her first weekend at Le Poisson Bleu to modest but enthusiastic audiences, Bradford caught wind of her growing local acclaim. Furious at her refusal to remain in the shadows and perhaps spurred by wounded pride, he began to orchestrate a more sinister form of sabotage. The embarrassment of being overshadowed by a mere waitress at his own party was something he could not forgive. Over the next few weeks, Emily's double life became increasingly demanding. Mornings and afternoons, she served the Waldorf Astoria's clientele with unwavering professionalism. In the evenings, she took cabs across town to Le Poisson Bleu, performing 2 or 3 sets of classical and jazz standards, sprinkled with her own arrangements. The local press started to notice the new pianist, who played with passion and soul, praising her ability to move audiences. Reviews popped up in small arts blogs and social media. One evening, a local critic named Lawrence Green from the Village Arts Review wrote a glowing piece about her interpretation of Rhapsody in Blue, calling it astonishing in depth and emotional resonance. Emily nearly fainted when she read the review. It was the first piece of professional recognition she'd ever received. Meanwhile, Bradford Kensington simmered with anger. He occasionally showed up at the Waldorf Astoria restaurant during Emily's shifts, glaring at her from across the room. Emily tried her best to remain composed under his scrutiny, but she could feel the tension crackling in the air. Her manager received phone calls complaining about her attitude, anonymous calls, of course, and threatened her with disciplinary measures if customer satisfaction didn't improve. Outside work, Emily noticed odd occurrences. Strange cars idling near her apartment, anonymous phone calls that hung up the moment she answered. She tried to brush them off as coincidences in a busy city, but a nagging feeling told her otherwise. One night, after her performance at Le Poisson Bleu, she exited through the back door to hail a cab. The alley was dimly lit, and she heard footsteps echo behind her. She quickened her pace, heart pounding, expecting to see a mugger or some shady character. Instead, she found a man in a suit, wearing a disconcerting smile. "Hello, Miss Carter," he said, his tone polite but chilling. "Mr. Kensington wants you to know that it's not too late to stop pushing your luck." Emily froze. The man slid a single piece of paper into her hand. She glanced down. It was a typed document, referencing a possible breach of her contract at the Waldorf Astoria for taking on unauthorized performances elsewhere. She looked back up to protest, but the man had disappeared into the shadows. Shaken, Emily hurried into the nearest cab. As it sped toward her apartment, she gripped the paper with trembling hands. So, Bradford was now threatening her livelihood. She stared out the window at the blur of neon lights and towering skyscrapers, wondering how far he would go to crush her. That weekend, she arranged to meet with her friend Jake at a quiet cafe. Over cups of strong coffee, she confided in him about the harassment. Jake frowned, tapping his fingers on the table. "He's definitely trying to intimidate you," he said. "But you have rights, Emily. The restaurant can't just fire you for having a second job, especially if it doesn't conflict with your schedule." Emily nodded. "I know, but Bradford has influence. He's got connections. If he wants to make my life miserable, he can." Jake drummed his fingers again, then leaned in. "Look, you're an incredible pianist. People love you at Le Poisson Bleu. Maybe it's time to think bigger. With the right connections, you might be able to leave the Waldorf job entirely." She sighed. I wish it were that simple. I still need a stable income, and I have no idea how to start a professional music career at my age. I missed so many years of training and networking. Jake studied her intently. Maybe this is your shot. You have to decide if you're going to let Bradford scare you back into obscurity, or if you'll break free. Emily left the cafe more uncertain than ever. She wandered around Central Park, the crisp air carrying the distant laughter of children and the rustle of leaves. The city's cacophony of horns and engines seemed to blend into a haunting melody in her mind. She found a bench near a small lake and sat, letting the evening sun warm her face as she mulled over her future. A memory of her father surfaced, his encouragement echoing in her ears. Never let fear keep you from sharing your gift. The resolve within her grew. She decided she would not cower before Bradford Kensington or any of his goons. If he wanted to ruin her, she would fight back by living her life on her terms, by playing music. The weeks that followed tested Emily's resolve. Between her day shifts and her nighttime performances, she was stretched thin. Bradford continued to appear at the Waldorf Astoria, making veiled insults and occasionally throwing his weight around with the management. She endured each slight with quiet dignity, refusing to give him the satisfaction of a reaction. Meanwhile, Le Poisson Bleu thrived on her performances. Word of mouth brought in larger crowds. Gerard, the manager, even offered her a raise if she would extend her performance schedule or consider a residency. Emily was tempted, but needed to ensure her finances were stable enough to leave her day job. One Sunday morning, Emily arrived at the restaurant for her shift, only to find the general manager waiting for her with a stern expression. "We need to talk," he said, guiding her to his office. The small room felt claustrophobic as he handed her a formal document, a warning letter. It stated that her outside activities were distracting her from performing her duties effectively, and if there was not an immediate improvement, further action would be taken. Emily's eyes scanned the letter in disbelief. She argued her case, citing her punctuality and her constant willingness to take extra shifts. But the manager shrugged, claiming he had received multiple complaints from VIP patrons about her lack of attentiveness. She knew exactly which VIP patron was behind this. As she left the office, anger and frustration twisted in her gut. She felt cornered, like a pawn in Bradford's game. The rest of her shift passed in a blur of forced smiles and clenched teeth. By the end of the day, she was mentally and emotionally exhausted. That evening, she barely had the energy to perform at Le Poisson Bleu. She tried to focus on the music, but her mind kept wandering to thoughts of losing her job. Her performance, while still solid, lacked its usual spark. A few regular patrons noticed she seemed troubled. Gerard approached her afterward, concern etched on his face. She explained the situation briefly, and he nodded sympathetically. "Emily," he said gently, "you have real talent. I wish you could see the future I see for you. Don't let fear or some millionaire bully snuff out your dream." She forced a thankful smile. "I'm doing my best. I just don't know how to fight back yet." Days bled into weeks. The standoff between Emily and Bradford escalated in small but maddening ways. A few times, Emily swore she saw that same suited man who had threatened her in the alley, lurking near Le Poisson Bleu or outside her apartment building. She filed a report with the local police station, but with no direct threat or physical harm. They told her there wasn't much they could do. Still, Emily held on. She continued to hone her performance, even starting to compose a few short pieces of her own. Late at night, after her shifts, she'd scribble down melodies in a worn notebook, occasionally dreaming of recording them one day. Despite the stress, music remained her sanctuary. Then came the breaking point. One evening, as she wrapped up a set at Le Poisson Bleu, Emily heard a commotion near the entrance. She recognized Bradford's voice, raised in anger. Her stomach turned to ice. Why was he here? She saw him arguing with Gerard, demanding that Emily come speak to him. The crowd fell silent, watching this bizarre spectacle unfold. Emily walked toward them, heart pounding so loudly she thought everyone could hear it. Bradford glared at her, his face twisted with contempt. "Ah, the star of the show," he sneered. "Congratulations, Emily. You become quite the performer, but you're still the same nobody underneath it all, aren't you?" Gerard stepped in, telling Bradford to leave or calm down. Instead, Bradford waved a folded sheet of paper in Emily's face. "You want to see how quickly your illusions can crumble? I hold your livelihood in my hands. One phone call, and you'll never find work in this city again." Emily's eyes burned, fury and fear melding in her mind. She stood firm, even though her entire body shook. "Why are you doing this?" she demanded. "What have I done to you, except play the piano and serve your meals?" Bradford laughed coldly. "You humiliated me in my own home. You made a spectacle of your hidden talent, stealing the limelight on a night that was supposed to be about my success. My associates won't stop talking about your performance, wondering if they can feature these piano waitresses at their events. You are an eyesore in my carefully curated world of power and prestige." The entire restaurant seemed to hold its breath. Customers and staff alike stared, some in horror, others in awe that someone so powerful could be so brazenly vindictive. Emily's fists clenched at her sides. She felt the pent-up frustration of months coalesce into a singular moment of clarity. "I will not apologize for being who I am," she said, voice steady despite her trembling hands. "I won't apologize for having a talent you can't control." Bradford's face reddened with rage. He flung the folded paper on a nearby table. "You'll regret this," he spat, then stormed out. Gerard placed a comforting hand on her shoulder as she stood there, shaken to the core. Her eyes flicked to the paper. It was some kind of legal notice, maybe a threat to sue her for breach of contract, or to orchestrate her firing from the Waldorf Astoria. She didn't care anymore. Something within her snapped that night. She resolved not to let Bradford's threats dictate her fate. What neither Emily nor Bradford realized was that a reporter from a local arts magazine had been dining at Le Poisson Bleu that night. In the days to come, the story of the millionaire's public meltdown and the courageous pianist who stood her ground began circulating in gossip columns and social media feeds across the city. Within a week, Emily found herself fielding requests for interviews from lifestyle bloggers, local radio stations, and even a few big-name publications looking for a human interest story. At first, she was overwhelmed and unsure if she should speak out. She worried that any attention she garnered would only fuel Bradford's anger and possibly jeopardize her job at the Waldorf Astoria. But then a phone call changed everything. It was from Karen Caldwell, a well-known talent agent who specialized in classical musicians. Karen had read about Emily's story and seen a short video clip posted by a patron at Le Poisson Bleu. The clip showed Emily playing a stirring rendition of Moonlight Sonata, tears shining in her eyes as she poured her heartbreak into each note. Karen was impressed and wanted to meet with Emily to discuss potential opportunities. Cautiously optimistic, Emily met Karen at a small cafe near Lincoln Center. Karen was in her 50s, with short cropped hair and an air of confident warmth. Over cappuccinos, Karen explained that she had connections with chamber orchestras and performance venues. She believed Emily's story, her humble background, her rediscovered passion could be a powerful narrative to captivate audiences. More than that, Karen genuinely believed in Emily's musical potential. Emily felt a resurgence of the dream she had once harbored as a child. She tried to remain grounded, asking about the practical steps. Karen offered a plan. They'd set up a series of small recitals around the city, starting with intimate venues. If those went well, they could aim higher, possibly even a feature in a larger hall. Emily felt tears welling up as she nodded, her heart pounding with hope. Meanwhile, as Emily's star began to rise, Bradford realized his threats were backfiring. Instead of cowering, Emily was being propelled into the spotlight, gaining sympathy and support from the public. News outlets painted Bradford as a villain, an arrogant millionaire bullying a talented underdog. Furious, Bradford tried another tactic. He used his connections with the Waldorf Astoria's upper management to force them to let Emily go. One afternoon, she was summoned to the manager's office and handed her termination notice. The official reason cited a breach of protocol and unapproved external endeavors interfering with job performance. Emily felt a crushing blow. Despite her brave front, she needed her job to pay rent, cover living expenses, and care for everyday necessities. She was not yet earning enough from her piano gigs to survive. However, as word spread about her abrupt firing, the public outrage soared. Social media exploded with calls for a boycott of the restaurant and even the Waldorf. Astoria faced criticism for kowtowing to a wealthy patron's vendetta. Karen urged Emily to speak up publicly, to tell her side of the story, but Emily hesitated. She didn't want to become a media spectacle. In the midst of this turmoil, an unexpected ally emerged, Anastasia Blythe, the pianist who had performed before Emily at Bradford's mansion weeks ago. Anastasia reached out through social media, sending Emily a direct message offering her support. They met for coffee, and Anastasia revealed that she, too, had faced intimidation from Bradford. After her performance at his party, he had tried to manipulate her into signing an exclusive deal to perform at his private gatherings, but she'd refused. Though her career was more established, she found it difficult to speak out publicly against someone so powerful. Together, they concocted an idea, a charity recital event aimed at supporting rising musicians who lacked the financial means or connections to break into the industry. They planned to hold the recital at a neutral venue, possibly a small concert hall, with the proceeds going to a local arts education non-profit. Anastasia would headline, and Emily would perform as a featured guest. This would not only provide Emily a chance to showcase her talent, but also garner goodwill and positive publicity. Karen Caldwell loved the idea and offered to help organize it, using her network to secure sponsors and media coverage. Within days, the event started to take shape. A modest but respected venue agreed to host them. Local businesses chipped in for refreshments, decorations, and marketing. Flyers circulated around the city, and an online ticketing system was set up. To everyone's surprise, tickets sold out within a week. As the date of the charity recital loomed, Emily poured herself into rehearsals. She selected an ambitious program, several Chopin preludes, a Liszt etude, and one of her original compositions. Each note felt like a stepping stone, carrying her closer to liberation from the shadows that had haunted her since her father's passing. She practiced at every opportunity, sometimes late into the night at Le Poisson Bleu, when the stage was free. Bradford, however, was far from quiet. He used his substantial influence to smear Emily's name, spreading rumors that she was exploiting public sympathy for financial gain. Certain tabloids published stories about her secret ambition to dethrone established pianists, painting her as manipulative. While a few gullible readers believed them, most saw it as a desperate attempt to discredit her. Then, in a stroke of poetic justice, a major scandal involving Bradford's real estate business broke. A high-profile investigative journalist released evidence of shady dealings, including bribing local inspectors, harassing tenants, and even forging documents to expedite building permits. The city government launched an official probe, freezing some of Bradford's assets pending investigation. The media that once doted on Bradford's every word now turned on him, publishing damning articles about his unethical behavior. He found himself knee-deep in legal trouble, his reputation tarnished, and his ability to influence others rapidly diminishing. While Emily had no part in uncovering his wrongdoing, she couldn't help but see it as karmic retribution for the misery he had tried to inflict upon her. Despite the chaos swirling around him, Bradford attempted one last move to sabotage the charity recital. He threatened to file a lawsuit against the event organizers for using his name without permission in promotional materials. Karen Caldwell quickly brought in a legal consultant who assured them that Bradford had no grounds for such a suit. They had merely listed him as an example of a wealthy patron who had been antagonistic, not defamed him. Embarrassed and exposed, Bradford's threats carried little weight anymore. His empire was crumbling, and he was too busy defending himself to launch a full-scale attack on Emily. In the days leading up to the recital, Emily felt a strange mixture of relief and sorrow. She detested what Bradford had done to her, but she couldn't fully celebrate another person's downfall, no matter how cruel he had been. She hoped he might learn a lesson from it all, though she doubted it. The evening of the charity recital arrived, bringing a crisp excitement to the late autumn air in New York. The venue was a beautiful, mid-sized concert hall on the Upper West Side, with plush red seats and warm acoustics that made even the quietest notes resonate. Dozens of city musicians, students, and supporters of the arts filtered in, dressed in semi-formal attire. Banners outside bore Emily's and Anastasia's names, along with the tagline, "Empowering Young Musicians, a charity recital celebrating musical passion and perseverance." All proceeds would go to a non-profit organization that provided free music lessons to underprivileged youth. Emily couldn't stop smiling as she saw young children entering the hall with bright eyes, possibly future musicians who would benefit from the night's concert. Anastasia opened the program with a sophisticated run of classical favorites, showcasing her impeccable technique. The crowd received her with roaring applause. During intermission, Emily stood backstage, her hands cold with nerves. Karen Caldwell approached her, offering reassurance. "This is your moment," Karen said softly. "You've worked for it. You deserve it. Play with your heart." When the lights dimmed and the announcer introduced Emily, she walked onto the stage, heart hammering. She took a moment to gaze at the sea of faces in the audience, many of them strangers, yet all of them there to support this cause and hear music. She thought of her father and felt a wave of emotion surge within her. Her first piece was a Chopin prelude, delicate and poignant. She played tentatively at first, but the warm acoustics and the encouraging silence of the audience boosted her confidence. She moved on to a Liszt etude, its swift passages and complex runs challenging her dexterity. By the time she hit the final chord, the audience erupted in applause. Finally, she introduced her original composition, explaining softly into the microphone that it was dedicated to her late father, who had instilled in her a love of music. Titled City of Dreams, the piece evoked the hustle of Manhattan, the heartbreak of losing a loved one, and the triumph of finding one's own voice. The melody ebbed and flowed with tension and release, minor chords resolving into uplifting harmonies. Each note carried her tears, her struggles, and her hopes for the future. When she finished, a stunned silence filled the hall. Then came the standing ovation. People cheered, whistled, even wiped away tears. Emily bowed, tears in her own eyes. This was the validation she'd yearned for since she was a little girl, practicing late at night with her father. She felt more alive in that moment than she ever had before. Backstage, Karen embraced her. Anastasia shook her hand with genuine admiration. The night continued with more performances by other musicians, but Emily's piece remained the highlight, the talk of the evening. After the finale, A small reception allowed patrons to mingle with the performers. As Emily sipped a glass of water, one of the event's sponsors approached. He introduced himself as Philip Strauss, a prominent figure in the city's music circles. He expressed his admiration and floated the possibility of featuring Emily in a future concert at a larger venue. Emily's head spun with excitement. Opportunities were suddenly blooming everywhere. In the weeks following the recital, Emily's life changed in ways she could barely comprehend. Karen Caldwell secured multiple offers for her to play in local concerts, and even a potential recording opportunity with an independent classical label. Though she was still making a fraction of what top-tier pianists earned, she now had a viable path to support herself through music, her true calling. Bradford Kensington, meanwhile, spent most of his time entangled in lawsuits, desperately trying to salvage his crumbling empire. News articles described him as a fallen mogul, once revered, now reviled. Rumor had it he was selling off properties to pay for legal fees. Emily only heard these updates in passing. Her focus was on her career, her newfound mission to support arts education, and the sheer joy of playing music. One chilly December afternoon, as Emily walked out of a rehearsal hall on her way to meet Karen for a meeting, she spotted a familiar figure leaning against a lamp post. It was Bradford, looking haggard and far older than his 40-something years. Dark circles rimmed his eyes, and his suit appeared slightly rumpled. She hesitated, wondering if she should turn the other way. Before she could decide, Bradford looked up, meeting her gaze. His arrogant posture was gone, replaced by a slumped resignation. He approached her with slow steps, as if weighed down by invisible chains. "Emily," he began softly, no sneer in his voice this time. I wanted to say something." She steeled herself, half expecting more vitriol, but the expression on his face was different, defeated. "I'm sorry," he finally said, voice almost a whisper. The words stunned her. "What for?" she asked, voice guarded. He sighed, shifting his weight from one foot to the other. "For everything. I let my ego, my need to control everything, turn me into a monster. You did nothing wrong but play beautiful music, and I tried to destroy you for it." Emily swallowed hard, trying to read his expression. Was this genuine remorse or a calculated move? Still, she felt a pang of pity. "Bradford," she said slowly, "I don't know if I can forgive you just like that. But thank you for apologizing." He nodded, his eyes flickering with regret. "I understand. I just wanted you to know I'm done fighting. I have enough battles of my own now," he added, referring to his legal troubles. She gave a small nod. Silence lingered for a moment. In that silence, both realized how drastically their fortunes had reversed and how swiftly life can rearrange the pieces on the board. With that, Bradford turned and walked away, blending into the steady stream of pedestrians. Emily stood there, letting the cold winter breeze wash over her. She didn't feel triumphant, nor did she feel vengeful. She felt relief, as though a heavy weight had finally been lifted. She inhaled the crisp air and exhaled a quiet resolution. Whatever had happened was now in the past. Her path forward was clear. That evening, she sat at her small upright piano in her apartment, a recent gift from a kind sponsor who wanted her to have an instrument at home, and began to compose a new piece. It started softly, in a minor key, reflecting the dark struggles she'd endured. But gradually, it rose into a major flourish, each note celebrating freedom, hope, and the blossoming of a future once deemed impossible. Life, she realized, had given her a second chance to follow her passion, and no millionaire's vendetta, no obstacle of circumstance could ever take that away again. Thank you for journeying with us through this tale of hidden talent, ruthless pride, and the unstoppable power of true passion. Emily Carter's story reminds us that no amount of wealth can suppress genuine artistry, and that courage often blooms in the most unexpected places. Though Bradford Kensington tried to humiliate and break her, he ultimately faced the consequences of his own actions, proof that karma finds us all, no matter how powerful we believe we are. If this story inspired you, please like the video to support the channel. Share this tale of resilience with those who could use a reminder that dreams can flourish against all odds. And most importantly, subscribe for more gripping stories of underdogs defying expectations, overcoming adversity, and shining their inner light for the world to see. Together, let's keep the spark of hope and creativity burning bright